Really wasn't until junior high school that I learned what it meant in a real sense when people said someone lived on the wrong side of the tracks. I had a newspaper out, the Fort Wayne News Sentinel, and part of my route required me to deliver papers on the other side of the tracks. Now, on my side of the tracks, this was, early blue-collar suburbia. Nice little, modest, small ranch houses in nice, neat rows on the streets. Single-car garages. And the wrong side of the tracks was, let's just say it was a more hard scrabble. They had more than one car, but one of them at least was up on blocks in the front yard. They had gravel or even dirt driveways. My friends on my side of the tracks, we all played baseball together. We were in scouts, we went to church, and we were all intimidated by the folks on the other side. Particularly our age peers. And I have to admit that in my first few months of delivering paper, I had to do some things to earn the respect of the children on the wrong side of the tracks. And the dogs. They never kept chained up. And that got me thinking, and I began to realize that my dad had grown up on the wrong side of the tracks. Dad grew up in Newcastle, Indiana. His father was part of the great northern migration from the hills of eastern Kentucky to the factories of Indiana. And their neat little bungalow, it really wasn't a very big house, but they managed to raise 6 kids in it, was literally on the wrong side of the tracks from all of the genteel merchants and professionals and others in Newcastle, Indiana. And our cities, our communities, indeed our society, I think, has for the longest time wanted to divide, make physical divisions among neighborhoods and groups of people. We live very close to what is known as the most segregated city in America, just because of the way the neighborhoods, intentionally or unintentionally, have been developed over the years. And they're not alone. I know when I served the church in Clarksville, Indiana, just across the river from Louisville, there was a neighborhood, an entire neighborhood of African-American families that Clarksville had intentionally carved out of their school system so that those kids wouldn't go to our school. In scarcity, folks are divided by fear of the other. And so we become overprotective, fence builders, boundary markers, even hoarders, protecting ours. But we find that rather than granting us safety and security, we find ourselves trapped. As those barriers and those boundaries we built to protect ourselves actually become the walls of our own prisons. The gospel lesson this morning is actually an encounter that's both geographical and it's racial. It's recorded in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark. If you want to look at Mark's version, you can find that in the 7th chapter, Mark chapter 7, beginning with verse 24. And the geographical setting here is Jesus has traveled to the extreme north end of the Jordan Valley. He is literally on the border between Syria and the Galilee. Now, we don't know whether in that encounter Jesus is on the wrong side of the tracks or this woman is on the wrong side of the tracks. But one of them was. In Matthew's account, it only says that Jesus went in the direction of the foreign country. In Mark's account, we're much safer, I think, in interpreting that he had actually entered into Gentile territory, because in Mark's gospel account, it said he, meaning Jesus, didn't want anyone to know he had entered a house. The important factor, whether we consider Matthew's account or Mark's account, is that Jesus was standing at a much more decisive border, a border that was not just geographical, it was also racial. He stood between the border of two distinctively different races of people, the Jews, his people, and the Gentiles, everybody that wasn't a Jew. Then the woman who confronted Jesus was a Gentile, which meant in the eyes of faithful Jews, she was a heathen, a pagan. Now, the relationship between Jew and Gentile doesn't mean a whole lot to us today. But in the days of Jesus' ministry, it was a highly explosive issue. In the minds of the disciples, the fact that this woman was a mother with a sick child, that was secondary to the fact she was a Gentile. For them, the issue was not whether Jesus had the ability to heal a sick child, but was he going to cross over the wrong side of the tracks that protected the purity of the Jews as the chosen people of God? Now, this is all born out of the fact that there were two views that were very held in tension in terms of the Jews' own understanding of their identity. One view, of course, held that Israel was to be a closed nation of those chosen children of God. We are children of Abraham. God made the covenant with Abraham, and He didn't make the covenant with other people, and we're the descendants of Abraham. The other, though, saw Israel as the priest nation servant to the world that God had called and created. Abraham was called by God to be the father of a particular people, but it was a calling with a covenant. And that was an agreement with a task. They were to be the means by which all of the nations of the earth would be blessed. Now, the prophets in the Old Testament never lost this perspective, but the Jewish leaders and the folks that came into the synagogues and to the temple, they viewed their election as a separation from an unclean and unholy world, to be a holy and a pure people. So they built up all these barriers between themselves and other people, barriers of exclusiveness. Then, this is the context of the encounter. Jesus clearly understood both views and how his ministry crossed back and forth on both sides of the tracks. Now, there are three easy to remember, but they're profound lessons from this story. Sometimes we get all wrapped up and we think Jesus is being incredibly rude. And that's not the Jesus, the warm and fuzzy Jesus we all tend to be used to, right? So, these are some lessons. And the first is that people are people regardless of the label they may wear or that we want to make them wear. Martha Johnson and her friend Linda were driving to the lake on a hot afternoon when several leather-jacketed, helmeted motorcycles roared past them on their Harleys. Martha and Linda grimaced. Those guys on those loud machines made them feel really uncomfortable. Now, on that hot afternoon, the lake was pretty crowded, and as Linda was wading waist deep in the water, she hit a hole and she suddenly disappeared. Before the lifeguard could reach her, a nearby swimmer came to her rescue, and he surfaced in just seconds with Linda safe in his arms. He carried her to the beach, told her everything would be all right, stayed with her until he was sure she was fine. And the women thanked him for his heroic act, but it didn't seem like such a big deal for him. And then he went and rejoined his friends. And when Martha and Linda got ready to leave, they saw more of those bikers walking in front of them. They changed out of their swim trunks and back into their leathers. And their negative thoughts about the bikers returned. Then she saw her rescuer with his leathers on. It's awfully easy to place people into categories of desirable or undesirable on the basis of their clothing, or their color, or their family background, or their economic status. Two little neighbor girls about the same age, one Christian, one Jewish. They were fast friends, did everything together. After one Easter holiday, the grandfather of the little Christian girl asked what her friend had received for Easter. And the girl looked at her grandfather and surprised and said, "Grandpa, Becky's Jewish. She wouldn't get anything for Easter." And she very patiently said, "You see, I'm Easter. She's Passover. I'm Christmas, she's Hanukkah." And she smiled and said, "But I'm really glad both of us are Halloween." Jesus' encounter with the Canaanite woman reveals the divisions among peoples that are still tearing our world apart. A couple thousand years later, when we really get to know one another, as Jesus got to know this woman in this very brief encounter in his ministry, we see that people are people no matter what labels they may wear. Now, our Acts chapter, our passage rather, this morning from Acts 15, a little bit about the background there, okay? And this is actually a couple of short verses from the account of what is called the Council of Jerusalem. And this was very early on in the history of the church, where the apostles all got together as the leaders of the church, and there was Paul and Barnabas was with them too. And the most important decision they had to make was, as Paul was taking ministry to the Gentiles, did they have to become Jews first before they could become Christ followers or Christians? And that had profound implications, not the least of which, if you were a Gentile man, that meant you were going to have to be circumcised. And the good news is that in this instance at least, Paul and Peter got along. They didn't always, but in this instance, they did. And we see, this is Peter, I think, who's talking. He says, "He made no distinction between us and them." They broke down the walls, those separations. So, people are people, regardless of the label they wear, or the ones we may put on them. And faith is faith wherever we may encounter it. You see, faith is a lot more than signing your name at the end of a list, short or long, of a certain set of doctrines. Faith is a condition of the heart. Otherwise, Jesus would not have declared this woman to be a person of great faith, because she was a Canaanite. They worshipped idols. Did you know how the Treasury Department trains its agents to spot funny money? They don't do it with examples of counterfeit money. They do it with the real deal. Because they train them to see all of the characteristics, all the details of the real stuff. They train them dealing only with the genuine article until their appraisal becomes second nature. And they can feel, sense, I mean, it's right there. They know immediately whether it's a phony or a real bill. Then, when they encounter counterfeit money, they can recognize it as such. Because their minds aren't filled with what might be wrong, or what usually is left off, or what mistakes are commonly made. They know what they're looking for because they're specialists in the real thing. In 1978, a minister who had been denied ordination in the United Methodist Church here in Indiana, a guy by the name of Jim Jones, led nearly 1,000 children and adults to their death in a mass murder and suicide. In 1993, a religious misleader named David Koresh led his followers to a horrible death. And through the years, we've watched other charismatic figures come and go, usually with less destructive but still disheartening results, because they were false, fake. So how do we protect people, particularly our own children, from falling prey to folks like that? We do it by showing them the real thing. Parents who profess one set of values and live another, they're setting themselves up for rebellion on the part of their children. And that rebellion may be against their Christian faith, or may take the guise of a fanatical obsession that rejects their parents' hypocrisy. Show them the real thing. That's the challenge for parents. And remember, every time we baptize a child, we as a congregation take a vow too, don't we? We have that responsibility to show them the real deal. 24/7, 365. And finally, Jesus' encounter with the Canaanite woman reminds us that love will find a way. This Canaanite woman was determined to find help for her daughter. Jesus knew his primary mission, it was to the lost sheep of Israel. God sent Jesus in the ultimate effort on God's part to call Israel back into covenantal faithfulness. But this woman badgered Jesus and his disciples until her request was fulfilled. Jesus, in turn, cut across the deep divisions that were there in his time in order to help someone in distress. And the moral of both of those responses is that love will find a way. That's the story of the cross. Humanity cut itself off from its Creator, creating a chasm that no man or woman could cross until God set down a piece of wood in the shape of a cross that became a bridge between humanity and God. Love will find a way. Catherine Lowe was a young wife and mother. Her husband happened to be the warden at Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, New York. And in the early years of the 20th century, women were not allowed inside the prison. Not even the warden's wife. But Catherine, though, had a lot of love in her. And she wanted to share that gift with other people. So she asked and was told that absolutely no way, you're totally forbidden to enter the prison. But Catherine, let's just say she was a woman of strong will. When the first inmate basketball game was announced, she took her two little girls and they went and sat in the bleachers. She got away with it. So she started taking bolder steps and bolder steps and bolder steps. Because she wanted to help prisoners. She knew that love could make a difference in anyone's life. One day she met a murderer named Jack. He was a big, bad, black man. And he was blind. So she introduced herself and said, "Hi, Jack." No response. That scarred face, that face scarred and battered by a hard life and so many fights and altercations in life, just stared right back with unseeing eyes. And Catherine said, "What books do you read?" Ooh, well, that broke the silence. He spit out the word and said, "I'm blind, lady, I can't read." "Oh. What about Braille? Did you know you can read with your fingers?" "I'll teach you." And she did. And then she found another inmate who was deaf. And he could not speak. He could not hear. He could not speak. So she learned sign language so that she could communicate with him. She opened doors to worlds of love for one convict after another over the years. And that love, it redeemed and restored some of the toughest of the tough, some of the meanest of the mean. In Sing Sing, they called her the lady in whom Jesus Christ has come to live. She gave her best, and a miracle happened inside the walls of prison, and lives were forever changed. A blind man learned to read. A deaf man learned to communicate. A Canaanite, pagan, heathen woman received healing for her daughter. People are people, no matter what label they wear. Faith is faith, no matter where we may encounter it, and love will find a way. You may have noticed we have a railroad track coming down in the middle of our sanctuary. And a reminder to us. So this morning, at the end of the service, remember that's the time we want you to share the peace of Christ, and that's much more than just shaking someone's hand and saying good morning. It's offering a blessing, saying the peace of Christ be with you. And in reply, if you wish to make a reply, say it, and also with you. I want you to do that. But I want you to do it a special way today. I want you to cross over to the other side of the tracks when you do it. Okay? The folks that you're sitting around, they know you love them. Okay? They'll let you do it for at least this one Sunday. Okay? You go on the other side of the tracks before you greet them. All right?
How did you distinguish that?
The challenge for us there is, if we do that, then we're taking steps to put scarcity. I mean, it's symbolic for us. But that's what we really need to do, you know, we have ministry to some people and places here, the ministry to the inmates at Westville and others, where we literally are crossing the tracks, but not all that many of us are. Okay? If we're willing to risk it, the love of Christ, we'll find a way. So take the risk. Cross over to the other side of the tracks. Maybe even the wrong side of the tracks. In fact, why don't we do that right now? Let's do that. Let's do that right now, okay? Don't wait till the end.